Facebook, go ahead and take it from mine and share it to yours. It's just taking a second to set up the Facebook Live, and then it's going to tell me we're live, which I believe we are live now. I'm seeing a message. That has nothing to do with anything. Okay, so now I'm back onto Zoom. Hopefully. You guys see me? Yes? Good. All right. Okay, 9:05. I don't want to waste any more time. Good morning, friends, and welcome to this discussion on the queering of the American child by Logan Lansing. Before we get started, I just want to make two quick disclaimers. One, this is not something where we are giving a lot of opinion. This is something where we are discussing the book. The book is taken with direct resources, so I will be sharing my screen and sharing with you the footnotes, the examples of where these things are coming from. Two, Logan Lansing, as far as I know, is not a religious person. This is not coming from a religious perspective. This is not about gay or lesbian bashing. This is only, you're going to find out that queering of children is not the same thing. It is not about stabilization for our children. I think that many people would agree that we are at a place where we simply don't hate people because they are different than us. That's not what this book is about. This book is about talking about what is happening in education with our children, and it digs deep into queer ideology. So with that, we'll get started with the book, The Queering of the American Child. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the hands up or to write in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them. We will go until 10 o'clock and we will stop right then because I want to be respective of your time. And I am not certain that these are in order because I have not managed how to upload. I've not managed quite how to upload onto Zoom, so I'm going to have to share my screen in order for us to see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to share my desktop. Can you all see my desktop? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
And if you wouldn't mind, if you're on Facebook, please go to my page and share this conversation onto your pages if you're willing to. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about, page 1, open up. Or don't open. Okay, here we go. So Judith Butler is one of the main authors of queer theory. I'm looking at page 51, and it says the politics of parity. So when we think of queer, what we are told and what our children are told is it's just affirming. It's just being kind. But you cannot be queer. You actually must do queer. So in the politics of parity, Butler's queer theory encourages using parodies of gender, sex, and sexual stereotypes as a wedge to undermine people's beliefs in them. So queering is performative. The goal of this approach is to mock the meaning out of gender, sex, sexuality, and to entirely to undermine people's beliefs in them as meaningful or stable categories. So what we have to remember is that there's no desire for stability. What we have to, hi Janice. So what we think and what we're told is that if we affirm people, they will not commit suicide, right? I'm sure you guys have heard that. So what we're told is that they will not commit suicide if they are affirmed. But what you're going to find out throughout this book over and over again, that kind of constant theme is that they don't want stabilization. To stabilize, to quote unquote normalize, is to ruin the goals of queering, because queering means to disrupt or to dismantle. So to undermine people's beliefs in them as meaningful and stable categories relevant to being, in the end, everyone becomes queer because no one can believe in normal anymore. Mind you, Logan Lansing has started this book. He started reading this book because he has young children. And this is the goal for young children. Performing your gender differently is an act of freeing your soul. I think one of the things that we see here is they openly say it's an act. So we are being told to affirm an act. I'm going to go to the next page. So all things queer ideology come from Marxism. All of these people, all of these socialists, all of these democratic socialists, whether they understand it or not, because many of these people are they're being slow boiled into it. No, there's a lot of people that if you came to and you said, do you want to be a communist? Do you want to be a socialist? They'd say, no way, those aren't my values. But they don't understand that a Marxian education is what they're getting, because most of our education is coming from a man called Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire was a Brazilian Marxist. So now I'm on page 57, and it says, for Marx, the history of my tribe's personal work preloads my consciousness. In this sense, I am my tribe. I don't think as an individual in a vacuum. There is no I think, only we think. So what's going on here is we are pushing into collectivism. That is, Marx thought humans were naturally collectivists. So Karl Marx thought that we are creative species that humanizes the world so that we can come to know ourselves as man. In this view, man makes society, and society reflects man's image back unto him. That is, humans create a society, and that society then creates future humans in the image of those who originally made it. Marx called these activities praxis. And the inversion of praxis, society socializes, thus makes man. A circle that, in the words of Hegel, runs back into itself. So what that means is that if you ask somebody who is into this, and you ask them, well, what's the end game? At what point will you be satisfied? There isn't an answer, because the praxis is the practice of the ideology over and over and over again. And Marx is very clear that his praxis is continuously dismantling until eventually you get to a point of utopia. So you have to ask yourself, do we want our kids to be taught over and over again that the goal is simply to destroy? Is that a hopeful education for our children? Hi, Tammy.
Hi, sorry, I have
You're
a
fine.
battery powered clock here and it is off.
No worries. We are doing this live. If you have any questions, you can use the hands up emoji, although I don't see the hands up emoji because I've got books open right now. And so we're just going through pages of the book, random pages, because what I want to do is an overview to get people hopefully interested in purchasing the book. Either you can buy it in paper, or it's now available on Audible. So either way, I think it's I think it's probably one of the most important books that you can read this summer, um, in order to understand what's going on. So I'm going to move to the third page here. Okay.
Carrie, while you're doing that, what
Yeah.
page were you on before?
Oh, good question. I think it was 57. Yeah, 57.
Okay.
And what I really appreciate is if you look down here in the bottom, there's footnotes. So this is not someone's opinion. This is a collection of research. So this is Marx K, written in 1852, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. And it's from the Marxist Internet Archive or Marxist.org. That's directly where this info is coming from. Okay, page 3, or the third page, is going to be it's not going to show me what page it's coming from. Okay, so this one says, in fact, by the 1960s, critical Marxists like Herbert Marcuse or Max Horkheimer were admitting that advancing capitalism delivers the good and allows workers to build a better life. One, to be sure, that is a good life. Thus, they observed, robbed the working class of its revolutionary energy and potential by stabilizing the worker in his good life. In other words, the communist revolution was no longer inevitable. The worker was no longer likely to be its vehicle, and Marxists needed new tools to push us all towards the end of history. Marcuse, following the success of Mao's Chinese Revolution, suggested identity politics would be the place to turn. And really what he did was he looked for the ghetto classes. So he looked for the Blacks, and he looked for homosexuals, and he looked for people that he could instill a sense of oppression. So queer theory's most influential contributors were all Marxists in orientation. All of them. So there's several names here. Bouvier, Foucault, and Judith Butler inherited the core concepts developed by Marxists in the first half of the 20th century and applied them specifically to studying sex, gender, and sexuality. They use Marxist theology. So while we aren't talking about religion here, they definitely are. They use Marxist theology as a launch pad for their social critiques, and in so doing so, created the new flavor of Marxism that we are dealing with today, which is queer Marxism. I'm sorry, I can't tell you the page, but I'll look it up later and let you know what it was. Hopefully the next one will have the page number on it. Okay, this is on page 62. In abolishing normalcy, man returns to his creative and social nature, which is intrinsically queer. So they want to abolish normalcy. Again, is this why we send our kids to school? Is this the success that we hope for our children when they go to school? Abolishing normalcy. Okay. So, and here's the point. Here's the big point in terms of when people say, you know, you're anti-gay, you're anti-lesbian, or even you're anti-trans, and they're saying that these are people are born this way. Okay. So here is what David Halpern writes. And David Halpern's paper are Saint Foucault. This is written in 1995. Saint Foucault towards a gay, I can't even see the word, but it looks like hagiography. And this is by Oxford Press. Down on the bottom, you'll see that right here. Okay. Queer, as David Halpern writes, needs not be grounded in any positive truth or in any stable reality. As the word implies, queer does not name some natural kind or refer to some determinate object. It acquires its meaning from its oppositional relation to the norm. So think about that for our children. If we are queering education, and by the way, when you see a welcoming and inclusive education, or when you see our school's commitments to being welcoming and inclusive, it means welcoming and inclusive of queer ideology. So again, as the word implies, queer does not name some natural kind or refer to some determinate object. It acquires its meanings from its oppositional relation to the norm. Queer is by definition whatever is at odds with normal, the legitimate, the dominant. There is nothing in particular to which it necessarily refers. It is an identity without an essence. So think about that in terms of having to affirm. You have to affirm absolutely everything, because nothing is based in truth. Let me go back into the Zoom and see, does anybody have fudge? Okay, stop sharing for a second. Does anyone have any questions so far or any comments? Does nobody want to talk? Okay, I'll go back to sharing. Okay, wait, that's not it. Share. Okay, you can see my screen. We were on 4. We're going to page 5. So, Giroux, his name was, I believe, Henry David Giroux. Okay. The notion of faith that emerges from Freire's work. Remember Freire, the Marxist. So the notion of faith that emerges in Freire's work is informed by the memory of the oppressed, the suffering that must not be allowed to continue, and the need to never forget that the prophetic vision is an ongoing process. Again, remember those words, it never ends. This is why they can't tell you what the end game is. This is Giroux, an introduction to Paulo Freire in Politics of Education. This is page 78 of the book. So again, the notion that emerges in Freire's work is formed by the memory of the oppressed, the suffering that must not be allowed to continue, and the need to never forget that a prophetic vision is an ongoing process, a vital aspect of the very nature of human life. In short, by combining the discourses of critique and possibility, Freire joins history and theology. So when people say there's no religion in our schools, a separation, no, man is made to worship, and this is the new theology. So in short, by combining the discourses of critique and possibility, Freire joins history and theology in order to provide the theoretical basis for a radical pedagogy that combines hope, their version, critical reflection, and collective struggle. So let's look at that word, critical reflection. This is where they say we want our kids to be critical thinkers. But you have to understand, under Paulo Freire, critical thinking means something very different than what we've always known it to be. It does not mean analyzing. It means looking at things critically, looking for things to resent, looking for problems, looking for the reason that you're oppressed. And if you reject the narrative that you're oppressed, or even if you don't reject it, but you think it's not beneficial to the life that I want to lead, then you are a problem. So it's perfectly fine to teach our children about racism and oppression and the fact that bad things have happened. But if your child says, I am so grateful that those things happened before I was born, and now I have this world where I can be friends with whomever I want to be, then they are not thinking critically. Because you have to think critically, you have to think within the lens of being critical about society so that you can find the reasons why it must be dismantled. So Paulo Freire applied critical theory to education to break what he considered a ruling class mechanism for maintaining the status quo. He developed a Marxist vision of what education should be. Education, remember these words, for critical consciousness. Again, critical consciousness means you have the right way of knowing. You have the right way of thinking about things. And there's only one right way, and that is their right way. That is why they say, I can't give my opinion. We must trust the experts. Because this is the new way of being conscious, of having that right way. And it is literally called ways of knowing. One thing that they will often say when it in reference to race is that we don't want Black faces that aren't Black voices. That's that collectivism. You must think the same way. So if a gay family, if you have two men and they are married and they are happy and they have a nice home and maybe they have a dog and a boat, maybe they even have kids, and they aren't interested in the continual struggle, the continual activism, then they don't have the right consciousness. And if you look at the standards for our kids in schools, if you look at how we're moving away from grading for merit and we're looking more at critical competencies, this is what you're going to find. So the pedagogy of the oppressed. As a humanist, and liberation pedagogy has two distinct stages. The first is the oppressed unveil the world of oppression and through praxis commit themselves to its transformation. The second stage, in which the reality of oppression has already been transformed, this pedagogy ceases to belong to the oppressed and becomes a pedagogy of all people. There's no room for dissent. This pedagogy ceases to belong to the oppressed and becomes a pedagogy of all people in the process of a permanent liberation. And that term liberation comes from the 1960s, comes from the Black Panther movement. So go and look at the people who are in charge of education today. Look at Becky Pringle. Look at the Weather Underground, who some of those people are deciding what our children are learning. One that comes to mind is Bill Ayers. So there's no room for dissent here. Next one. And I'm so sorry about the squiggly lines here. If you're trying to like copy it or anything, I was reading this while we were driving. So this is page 79. His method is simple. Now, this is where it really talks about how our children are learning. So Freire then critiqued traditional educational methods for all of the ways they don't lead to the development of critical consciousness in learners. Finally, he developed teaching methods and practices for achieving his vision. His method is simple. Academic material like literacy lessons become mediators to political knowledge, which is to say that critical Marxist interpretation. So your child might be reading a book, but they are reading a book with a strong, the goal is not not to master literacy. The goal is to master an understanding of a level of oppression, specifically their level of oppression. So his method is simple. Academic material like literacy lessons become mediators to political knowledge, which is to say, critical Marxist interpretation. Everything has to come down to a Marxist interpretation. That is, academic material becomes an excuse to talk about radicalizing political issues on critical Marxist terms. So I've used the example before and I'll use it again. A math lesson, a teacher is talking and says, instead of saying 3 kids decided to ride the whirlywig and 5 kids decided to ride the roller coaster, how many kids went on rides? They would say, oh my goodness, let's talk about a carnival. Have you ever been to a carnival? Oh, there's a carnival in Spanish Fork this weekend. Let's talk about that. Who's going? Oh, you're not going? Why are you not going? Maybe a kid says, well, my parents think that, I don't know. My parents think that kids dress inappropriately there, so they don't want me to go. Oh, that's really sad. Your parents, well, people can dress however they want, right? I mean, we shouldn't judge people. That's not very kind. So yeah, maybe they're just wearing, a bra because it's half. They just start changing and taking that math lesson from being a math lesson to a discussion about what they want that discussion to be about. That is how they get into that critical Marxist interpretation. That is academic material. And going back to the book now, again, this is page 79. That is academic material becomes an excuse to talk about radicalizing political issues on critical Marxist terms. And oftentimes what happens in these lessons is that they never get to the math problem itself. They only are focused on that conversation. They're only focused on leading kids, quite frankly, indoctrinating kids into what they want them to think about. So, Freire's vision, critique. On critical terms. Freire's vision, critique, and method amount to a Marxist theory of education explicitly predicated on the success of Mao Zedong in China. If you don't know who Mao Zedong is, I encourage you to learn. There is a reason why we do not know about China's history. There's a reason why we do not know about Stalin's history. And there's a reason that we do not know about Pol Pot and the killing fields, because all of them, and of course Hitler, all of them went for the children first. All of them went to the children and changed education. So, predicated on the success of Mao Zedong in China, that Marxists could practice on learners to brainwash them into a Marxist faith. At its core, Paulo Freire's Marxist theory of education is a Marxist theory of knowledge. Freire calls into question what knowledge is, who defines it, who certifies it, and who determines what knowledge is taught in the classroom. So again, this comes down to something I was making in the video earlier this week about approved sources. This comes down to social media literacy, which tells you what sources are acceptable and what ones are not, based on, again, these experts. For Freire, only the oppressed have true knowledge of their concrete conditions. But again, only the oppressed. I think everybody on this is an actual personal friend. You guys know my story. You know that I come from a certain level of what most people would arguably call oppressed or underprivileged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My viewpoint is not welcome on these things because I don't play into the victim narrative. If your child does not play into the victim narrative, I don't even want to think about what that means for them because I know what it means for me as an adult. and putting children on that front line is something I'm very concerned about. So for Freire, only the oppressed have true knowledge of their concrete conditions, and traditional educational methods only serve to ignore the true knowledge while forcing learners to accept the truth as society wants them to see it. Do we have any questions? Okay, I will move to the next one. Whew. Okay.
Carrie, there's just so much information. I don't know. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know so much. I guess I need to learn about Mao a little bit more. I don't know anything. So yeah, thank
So
you.
one way that you can learn about Mao, I have several interviews with people who have escaped communism. At least 3 of them are from people who've come from China. And 2 of them are people who grew up under Mao's Cultural Revolution. One book that I can highly recommend is a book called Dragon Elegy by my friend Kiri Walder.
Okay, I might want you to post that. Mhm.
Okay, I will
Okay.
post that. Remind me at the end when I go back into my thing.
Okay.
But yes, and then also Xi Van Fleet has written a book, and these are people. The Cultural Revolution is no joke.
Yeah.
They started with our children. In fact, what they did was they closed schools down for 2 years. Listen to that. They closed schools down for 2 years. And when they came back, school looked very, very different. Children were encouraged to
This-
report on their teachers. They were encouraged to report on their teachers for giving them too much work, for stressing them out. Very similar to what we're looking at today.
Right,
So
thank
they just basically undid Western Civ, because believe it or not, China was thriving under Western civilization. So, and it took them 2 years, kind of like what happened to us, huh? All right. The explicit goal of Freire's methods is to motivate learners to become awakened or woke revolutionary activists charged with denouncing everything, and in doing so, announcing the prophetic vision of a communist utopia that follows. Communist utopia that follows. One of the basic questions, I hope I have the next page. Well, I'll just leave it there. Okay, so to motivate activism. And we know that, I don't have that paper in front of me, but I've shared it multiple times. The UEA, Utah Education Association, talks about how their new building is going to be a hub for education activism. That's the UEA. So we can say all we want that it's not in Utah, and I'm happy to share that page if anyone wants to see it right out of their own magazine that was sent to me by a teacher. Okay, next page. Is that this one? It's this one. Nope, sorry, I'm past that. Sorry, guys. That's the one I'm on. Oh, okay. There's no way I can read that. Okay. Oh, here's where they talk about how it is absolutely a religion. So this says, furthermore, Freire, this is on page 81, by the way. Furthermore, Freire sees this process Furthermore, Freire sees this process in explicitly religious terms, calling it a process of death and rebirth, and even comparing it to a personal Easter. This apprenticeship demands that first of all, they really experience their own Easter, that they die as elitists and are so resurrected on the side of the oppressed, that they be born again with the beings who are not allowed to be. Born again with the beings. This is being an ally. The beings who are not allowed to be, those people that we say, when we say transgenderism is a myth or anything along those lines, that's what they mean by not allowed to be. And that is why they say that transgenderism or being trans is to be divine. So he describes this personal Easter in stark, cultic terms explicitly designed to displace Christianity. Let me repeat that again. He describes this personal Easter in stark, cultic terms explicitly designed to displace Christianity. And this is going to come straight from Freire, the politics of freedom, or the pedagogy of freedom, ethics, democracy, and civic courage. And the politics of education, culture, power, and once again, liberation. What do they want liberation from? This Easter, which results in the changing of consciousness, must be existentially experienced. The real Easter is not commemorative rhetoric. It is praxis. It is historical involvement. The old Easter of theoretic is dead, with no hope of resurrection. It is only in the authenticity of historical praxis that Easter becomes the death that makes life possible. But the bourgeois worldview, basically necrophiliac, death-loving, and therefore static, is unable to accept this supremely biophiliac, life-loving experience of Easter. The bourgeois mentality, which is far more than just convenient abstraction, kills the profound historical dynamism of Easter and turns it into more than a date on the calendar. Marx absolutely, unapologetically hates theology, hates God. He talks about dismantling everything and walking amongst the rubble as a god himself. If you dig into Marx, you will find an angry man who is not very reputable, who cheats on his wife with his maid, who tells his mother that if she doesn't continuously send him money, he is going to let himself be arrested. I mean, I will say my opinion here, he is the quintessential basement dweller who is resentful about everything else. And it kind of explains where a lot of our young people who are adopting Marxism are headed. Okay, next one, I think it's that right there. Sorry if it's the same one. Nope, I've done that one. So here. Okay. So now we'll talk really briefly about critical, culturally relevant teaching. This is, I don't know what page, sorry. Although you can find numerous examples of grade school teachers deploying critical pedagogy in their classroom as early as the 1980s, it wasn't until Gloria Ladson-Billings developed, and I promise you, my friends, this is in our schools. And when I mean our schools, I mean in Utah County, because these are the books that I took pictures of. Culturally relevant teaching. That critical pedagogy went mainstream in children's classrooms. Ladson-Billings, the Marxist educator who popularized culturally relevant teaching and other CRT, is one of Freire's direct theoretical descendants. Several generations removed from Frere's canonical, I can't pronounce it, texts. Many of today's teachers, administrators have no idea that Frere's critical theory of education underpins one of their most prized educational concepts. So culturally relevant teaching. And we will dig into it. The culturally relevant teaching, originally, the reason that they got it in is they said that the Aborigines, when they came into Australia's mainstream classrooms, they had no idea what they were doing. It didn't relate to them in any way, shape, or form. And so they had to meet them where they were at. That makes a lot of sense in that circumstance. But then you have to think about why we're applying it today. We're saying that children born in America, children that are neighbors playing the same games inside and outside, children that speak the same language, we need to be culturally relevant or responsive to these kids. And what we have done instead is we've used it. It's become the Trojan horse. So we say that we need books that are representative of the Black experience. And instead of looking at the highest levels of the Black experience, they will put pornography into schools. They will put, for very young children, stories about drugs, stories about incest, sexual abuse, prison and gangs. And they will say, well, that's the way Black people see themselves, even if that's not any child in their classroom's experience and it's the furthest thing from it. They say that's what they need in order to be culturally relevant. Now, I've read some books. There's books called the Track series that have some of those concepts, but they're done in a way that is not about queering the child. I think one of the biggest things, and I don't think I have it on these because I'm getting through the pictures, but one of the biggest things that this book talks about is why it's important to queer the child and how you do that. And it uses the analogy of a canoe. So you've got a canoe and you put a small child. You want to do this very, very young because you can't queer a child. Most of their identity is figured out before they even get into school. So you want to start really, really early with these small kids. And you take a canoe, you put a kid in the canoe, hypothetically speaking, and you put them in the most raging waters that you possibly can. And when that canoe flips over and they're afraid for their lives and they're floundering around, then the teacher is there to bring them to safety. And so what queering is about, in a nutshell, is traumatizing our children, taking away everything that they believe is normal, their family, their religion, their culture, taking that away from them, what they believe to be the truth, and completely changing that as fast and as rapidly as possible. And then when they do that, they're brought into the new queer, the new, there is no such thing as normal. And as your teacher, I am the person that you trust. And that is directly from this book. And that's directly what is being taught through that's what it means to queer our children. Okay, so her education, let's see. Her education left her convinced that teachers could only be successful in liberating their students. And that's what it means to liberate your students, to free them of all their old ideas, old customs, old cultures. I believe that is this one. Nope, keep going there again. That one, going here. She developed her Her theory of culturally relevant teaching to address multiple domains of oppression, not just the economic class. Culturally relevant teaching is, in other words, is intersectional. It is meant to address the cumulative way in which multiple forms of discrimination combine, overlap, and interact in the lives and experiences of students. This is page 85. Like the free Aryan teacher, so this is one step past. We had the free Aryan teacher, now we're getting into the culturally relevant teacher. And when I took the pictures in the classroom, the teacher that I was subbing for was still at school. But what she was doing that day was teaching, she was coaching other teachers on culturally relevant teaching. The culturally relevant teacher's job is explicitly given to develop a critical consciousness in students. That's specifically the reason they want to develop critical consciousness in students. So think about it when your kids come home. What are the discussions that they're having? I'm aware of 2 little boys who both happen to be mixed, but one is lighter than the other. These are cousins, but they live together. And they have discussions, and I mean little boys. I think they're 2nd graders. And these boys in Springville are already pitted against each other. One will tell the other boy that he has more privilege. And the mother has to break that down for the kids and explain and reteach them when they come home. So the culturally relevant teacher's job is explicitly given to develop a critical consciousness in students, teaching them how to use a Marxist socio-political analysis to understand how their cultural identity, their race, their sex, their gender, etc., and lived experiences are excluded from classrooms and society. After learning that they are oppressed, children are meant to begin practicing critical reflection. Children are taught, this is where they say, we're just teaching children to be empathetic. But they're being empathetic to what? Is this real empathy? After learning that they are oppressed, children are meant to begin practicing critical reflection, reflecting on their culture, identity, and experiences from a Marxist standpoint. This critical reflection is designed to motivate students to take up radical political activism. And so what that looks like, again, I've used this example, is for a 3rd grade classroom to perform Ruby Bridges and to actually do what's called Ruby Bridges walks to school and to think about why they are oppressed today, just like Ruby Bridges was in the 1960s. Not to be grateful for the fact that today we can all be in a classroom and learn the same things and have the same opportunities. Instead, to find their reasons for oppression and to lean into activism. And the final page that I'll read today. Critical pedagogy believed that every dimension, and this, Peggy, for you is page 87. Critical theory believed that every dimension of schooling and every form of education practice are politically contested spaces. Every single part of education, and people will say it, teaching is political. 4-H is political. Any form of education is political. But what they mean by political is they mean politically left. The goal is to turn the kids politically left. So every dimension of schooling and every form of education practice are politically contested spaces. Activists begin querying not just the curriculum, but school policies and procedure, all under the guise of becoming more culturally relevant, diverse, equitable, and inclusive. If there's anything that you can do Go look at your school's inclusivity policies. Diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Each advance was accompanied by the moral weight of an argument to increase LGBTQ empathy, visibility, and representation. So you're going to hear that we need our schools to be inclusive and we need our children to have more empathy. You're going to hear that we need our churches to be inclusive and we need to have our children become more empathetic. In the real world, in the world that we understand, yes, 100%. But you have to understand that our words are weaponized. One thing that they say is we use the same glossary, but not the same definitions. So you'll look up a word and what you think it means. Resilience is a good one. Oh, our governor recently said teachers are resilient. And what we think that means, resilient, strong and able to work through something and still be who they are. It literally is like a rubber band that changes and it adopts all of these new ideas, but on the outside still looks the same. That's what the new resilience means. So, equitable, okay. Most of the educators who have irrevocably harmed education and therefore children over the past 3 decades aren't aware that their theory of education and teaching practices are derived from the works of Paulo Freire, which is why a lot of people will say, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not here. But if you talk to them about culturally relevant teaching, they do know that term. And a bunch of names. Still, despite their ignorance, the literature is unambiguous. Educators today have inherited a critical orientation towards schooling from these revolutionary radicals who have been explicit in their intentions and goals for a very, very long time. So that is the opening interview or the opening overview. Once again, we're almost finished. Does anyone have any questions or any comments that they'd like to make before I end today's discussion?
Amazing discussion. I'm learning.
Overwhelming, huh?
I've known a lot about the Chinese Marxism information. I served my mission 87 in Japan. And then after I was done in 89, I went to Taiwan and lived there during the Tiananmen Square massacre and all of that. I've understood, the Marxism in China. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Does anyone else have any comments?
Well done. Well done, Carrie.
Oh, sorry. I've got somebody making comments in the chat. So let me pull that up. Oh, and both books that I suggested. The first book is Dragon Elegy. Yeah, it says that your mic is off, Janice. Let me see. Let me see on your side, participants. Got your camera off. Yeah. Still, hi. Still can't hear you. You're not muted. If you want to write it in the comments, I'm happy to read it. Do you want to write what you want to say? Okay, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the other book, Carrie? You said Dragon Elegy. What's the other one?
Oh goodness.
Have it, or just
Okay.
let us know when you have it.
I think I just said that Xi Von Fleet has written a book. So Xi Von Fleet, Xivan. Let's see. Somebody writing? Making sure. I want to see if anybody's writing. Oh, somebody just wrote The Queering of the American Child, which is the book. Again, it's 6 hours on Audible if you want to get it that way, and James Lindsay reads it. So, and or you can get it and mark it. I do have a friend. I'm pretty well connected, so I have a friend who has the PDF of it. And so what I'll do for the rest of it is ask her for that and then highlight it so it's much more clear than my scribbling. For future things. We will start again on August 3rd with a deep dive. So we'll just read chapters 1 and 2 for August 3rd. It would be great if you would bring, yes, Dragon Elegy. What's the spelling? Yes. It's just 2 words. So it's Dragon and Elegy. I want to know how to have a conversation with my married children or grandchildren or others to help them start to see what's happening without overwhelming them. Is there a way to address that at some time? Yes. I am hoping to do a very simple, well, for me, very simple back to school presentation on the red flags in education. I'm willing to bring that into any county in Utah. I just ask that there's at least 10 people who can attend so that it's worth the gas. And then I also am trying to make 5-minute or less videos explaining what's going on in education. And then you can share those. I also do a regular live. I'm trying to keep those short, just covering like a page in each one of my lives. So you can watch them. I'll try to do them pretty regularly. This week I'm going to scout camp, so I don't know how regular I can be on that this week, but then like right now, as soon as I get done, I'm going to cover 1 page. That's the easiest way that I can think of making it simple. I know people are like, can you do a 1-minute reel on Instagram? And there's no way. There's simply no way that I can cover this stuff in 1 minute. Having these conversations. Another really good website is Protect Our Kids, or I think it might be Protect US Kids. I'll have to look it up. Let me look it up really quick. But they do short videos explaining what's happening in school. And they do it with cartoons, which makes it easier for people to get that bite-size information. And I think the other thing that I really want to get across, and then I promise to let you go, is that while it's infuriating, while we get very angry about what's happening, we have to understand that our teachers were presented with empathy. Our teachers were presented with, this is the only way to keep children alive. They were lied to. And sadly, a lot of kids who get really caught up in this end up passing away. Or end up despising their families, which is a huge part of the goal, because you can't have people allegiant to the state if they're well connected to their families. But we have to approach it with a teacher's heart and with grace, because there's so many good people who've been caught up in this. So I look at it as, once you know, it's your job to educate, but you must do it from a place of love. And then there's, our next book is going to be Socialists Don't Sleep. And then you understand that there are people who absolutely know what they're doing. But I believe most people do not know that they are adopting really toxic ideas for our kids. And so it says, thank you.
Hey, I can figure
yes.
out where my raise my hand thing is on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that this kind of ideology in the classroom really does target kids who are vaccine injured, the Asperger's autism kids.
Yeah.
And so that is another sad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to hit the people who are very black and white in their thinking. I am glad that your daughter isn't seeing these things. again, I'm going to do a presentation on the red flags, because some of the things that you won't see, and also you will find out as you're reading this book that there are teachers. It is very specific, again, with the UEA in their magazine. They had they have a summer class on how to push back against parental resistance. Some of these people, like I said, look up the inclusion policy, read through it. If they say they have a commitment to be inclusive of all generally means LGBTQ. That is the high focus here. It is not all. The there have been kids who have stood up in class and said, I love being gay. Being gay is the best thing ever in the world. And when a straight conservative kid said, I disagree, that kid was pulled out of school, or that kid was pulled into the office and had to sign a paper that they were a bully, even though they'd never been in trouble before. But for
And
daring
that
to
came
speak out,
about with Elizabeth Smart's bill passing. They snuck all of that in the comprehensive sex ed in
yeah,
under bullying. The guy's a bullying. So no,
right.
it's everywhere. I 100% believe that, and I'm supportive of trying to get a large event too for you to speak at, and then put it on live.
Right.
And
yeah.
so excited.
Yeah,
that
we'll
you can-
we'll try and find that. I just want to get the word out as to as many people as I can. And I recognize that there are people who will call me a liar and say that I'm full of misinformation. And that is why I try my best to stick to things that have sources, that have the footnotes directly from there. Another thing that anyone can read if they want to is they can read Judith Butler's Queer Theory. I believe it's a paper, and it's available on New Discourses. That's an excellent site. That is James Lindsay's website, and it's an excellent site for going direct to sources. All right, my friends, I promised that I would keep it at an hour, so I'm going to log off, and hopefully I will see you back. Please invite any like-minded friends or any people who are even open to hearing these kind of conversations. And I will see you on August 3rd. Bye.